history hides more than it reveals. Across the Americas, lost cultures whisper through ruins, symbols, and vanished cities. From the Toltec to the Torona, their secrets remain unsolved. Ready to uncover what time tried to erase? Then hit subscribe, because the past is just getting started. The Caddoan Mississippians hidden in the river valleys of what is now Oklahoma, Arkansas, Texas, and Louisiana once thrived a civilization. Few today have ever heard of the Caddoan Mississippians. They were mound builders, artists, traders, and astronomers. Around 800 CE, these people began shaping the land, building enormous earthen mounds that rose like silent sentinels above the plains. The largest among them, Spiro Mounds in eastern Oklahoma, held intricate burial chambers, elaborate copper plates, and carved shell artifacts that rival anything found in Mesoamerica. But the Caddo left no written language, no stone temples, only earth, bone, and mystery. Their society was part of the larger Mississippian world, linked by trade to Cahokia and far beyond. Yet the Caddoan variant developed its own identity by complex ritual life, careful urban planning, and a deep reverence for the cosmos. Their mounds were often aligned with celestial events, suggesting a sophisticated understanding of time and the stars. By the 15th century, their monumental cities had faded, whether from disease, drought, social upheaval, or a combination of forces. Their world unraveled. When European explorers finally arrived, they encountered only the scattered descendants of what had once been a powerful, organized society. Today, the mounds remain quiet and weathered, offering only fragments of a forgotten vision. What did the Caddoan Mississippians see in the stars? What truths did they bury beneath their sacred earth? The answers, if they exist at all, lie waiting in the soil still untouched, still silent. The Plaquemine culture along the lower Mississippi River, in the humid floodplains of what is now Louisiana and western Mississippi, a distinct civilization quietly flourished. The Plaquemine culture, emerging around 1200 CE, the Plaquemine people inherited the traditions of earlier mound-building societies, yet carved out a culture uniquely their own. Towering platform mounds, some over 50 feet tall, rose above their settlements, built not merely as burial sites, but as elevated stages for temples and the homes of elites. These earthen monuments weren't isolated. Many were part of complex ceremonial centers that hinted at a highly organized society with spiritual and political hierarchies. Their pottery was bold and intricate, marked by incised patterns, human effigies, and vessels shaped like animals or celestial symbols. These artifacts suggest a worldview steeped in ritual, mythology, and perhaps a deep connection to the rhythms of nature. Unlike their Mississippian neighbors in Cahokia, the Plaquemine culture developed in relative isolation, yet still showed signs of cultural exchange. Over time, they interacted with other groups, especially the Caddo and later European explorers. But by the 1700s, disease and colonization had erased most of their visible traces. What remains are the mounds. Questions. Why did they choose to build so close to rivers that often flooded? What cosmology guided their temple rituals and iconography? And perhaps most haunting, how much knowledge was lost before it could ever be recorded? Today, the Plaquemine mounds still rise from the swampy, earth-weathered, silent, and watching, guarding stories that no one alive can fully tell. The fort, ancient culture in the rolling hills and river valleys of the Ohio River Basin. A civilization rose that left behind no written language, earthworks, pottery, and questions. This was the fort, ancient culture, beginning around 1000 CE. The fort ancient people built large, circular villages near streams and rivers in what is now Ohio, Kentucky, and West Virginia. Their settlements were organized with striking intention homes, arranged around central plazas, often near earthen mounds, used for burial or ceremony. These were not scattered bands of foragers. They were farmers, artisans, and astronomers. Corn, beans, and squash, the three sisters of North American agriculture, formed the heart of their diet. Their pottery was detailed, their tools sophisticated. They buried their dead with care, often with personal ornaments or carved stone objects, suggesting a rich spiritual life and social structure. Unlike the more centralized Mississippian cultures to the south, fort ancient society seems less rigid, more communal. Yet they too observed the skies, built ceremonial sites, and traded widely. The famous Serpent Mound, though likely older, was visited and possibly revered by the fort ancient people, indicating a connection to a much deeper cultural memory. By the 1600s, their villages had vanished. Disease, displacement, and pressures from expanding European contact likely played a role. No direct descendants remain to explain their symbols or stories. Some scholars once linked them to the Shawnee, but no clear line survives. What knowledge did they carry of the ancient mounds? What rituals were held beneath the stars in those circular plazas? The traces of the fort ancient culture remained faint, but beneath the soil, their story lingers, waiting to be pieced together, one artifact at a time. The Adena culture, long before the rise of cities or kingdoms in the Americas. A people known as the Adena quietly shaped the landscape of the Ohio Valley, leaving behind some of the oldest monuments in North America. Emerging around 1000 BC, the Adena culture thrived for nearly a millennium, centered in what is now Ohio, with their influence spreading into Indiana, Kentucky, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania. They were among the first in this region to build monumental burial mounds, some modest, others towering over 60 feet high. These mounds, made of earth moved basket by basket, weren't just graves, they were ceremonial centers, layered with meaning and mystery. Inside the mounds, archaeologists have discovered finely crafted artifacts, intricately carved stone tablets, pipes shaped like animals and humans, copper bracelets, and exotic materials like mica and marine shells, evidence of trade networks stretching hundreds of miles. The Adena was skilled in agriculture, but also hunted and gathered, living in small, semi-permanent villages. Their societies seemed to be organized around spiritual leadership, and their burials suggest a reverence for ancestors and the cycles of life and death. But perhaps most puzzling is what we don't know. The mounds remain, yet the stories behind them, what they believed, how they viewed the cosmos, why they chose certain locations, remain obscured by time. By around 200 BCE, the Adena culture began to fade, giving way to the Hopewell tradition, which would build even more elaborate earthworks. Still, the Adena were the first to shape this sacred landscape, and as their silent mounds continue to rise from the forest floor, one can't help but wonder, who were they building for and what messages did they leave behind in earth and stone? The Hopewell cultures scattered across the woodlands of the Ohio River Valley are geometric earthworks so vast and precise, they can only be fully seen from the sky. These are the silent footprints of the Hopewell culture in ancient civilization that flourished between 200 BCE and 500 CE. Unlike a kingdom or empire, the Hopewell were a network of communities connected by shared beliefs, rituals, and an astonishing ability to shape the land. They built massive ceremonial center circles, squares, and octagons carved into the earth with mathematical accuracy, often aligned with lunar and solar cycles. Some of these earthworks span over 100 acres, with ditches and embankments, engineered on a scale that defies simple tools. Inside their burial mounds, archaeologists have uncovered wonders: obsidian blades from the Rocky Mountains, copper from the Great Lakes, seashells from the Gulf Coast, and even mica from the Appalachians. These artifacts suggest a trading network that stretched across most of prehistoric North America, and a spiritual world as vast as the one they traversed. The Hopewell people lived in small villages, hunted, farmed, and held elaborate ceremonies that brought communities together. Their artwork, especially effigy pipes and finely crafted ornaments, reflect a culture deeply attuned to nature and symbolism. And then around 500 CE, the building stopped. The earthworks were abandoned, the mounds sealed. What caused the decline is still debated: climate change, shifting social patterns, or perhaps something more subtle. Yet the monuments remain, etched into the soil like ancient equations we still don't fully understand. What did the Hopewell seek to mark with their immense designs? A message to the gods, a map of the heavens, or perhaps a legacy meant to echo across millennia, waiting for someone to listen? The Fremont culture in the high deserts and rugged canyons of what is now Utah, a culture emerged that left behind no cities, no great pyramids, but a trail of symbols carved into stone. This was the Fremont culture, flourishing between 300 and 1300 CE. The Fremont people occupied a vast and varied landscape, ranging from mountain valleys to arid plateaus. Their way of life was a delicate balance between agriculture and foraging. They grew corn in dry rocky soils using clever irrigation techniques, while also hunting deer, gathering wild seeds, and adapting to the harsh rhythms of the land. What sets the Fremont apart is not monumental architecture, but their haunting rock art. Thousands of petroglyphs and pictographs, human-like figures with trapezoidal bodies, horned masks, and mysterious gestures, cover cliff walls across Utah and surrounding regions. Some appear ceremonial, others perhaps astronomical, and many remain undiscovered. The images seem to whisper of a culture that viewed the world through a lens, both practical and spiritual. They built pit houses, stored food in clay-lined granaries tucked into cliffside alcoves, and crafted pottery that was simple yet durable. Their tools, bone, stone, and fiber, show a people skilled in survival. And then they vanished. By the 14th century, Fremont sites were abandoned. Drought, resource scarcity, or cultural absorption into neighboring groups like the ancestral Pueblones may have played a role, but the truth is uncertain. The canyons they once walked now echo with silence. Only the stone figures remain watching from the cliffs, frozen in time. What were they trying to say in those carved symbols? And why did they leave them where only the wind could read them? The Hohokam culture. Beneath the sun-scorched soil of Arizona's desert lies the story of a people who mastered water in a land of none. Known as the Hohokam, they built a civilization where survival demanded innovation, and they delivered it on a remarkable scale. From around 200 CE to 1450 CE, the Hohokam transformed the Salt and Gila River valleys into a thriving agricultural heartland. Using nothing more than hand tools and sheer determination, they engineered one of the most extensive pre-Columbian canal systems in North America. Over 500 miles of irrigation canals, some over 30 feet wide, carried life-giving water to their fields of corn, beans, squash, and cotton. But they weren't just farmers. The Hohokam were builders, traders, and artists. They constructed ball courts for ritual games, multi-room adobe structures, and platform mounds that served ceremonial purposes. Their pottery was bold and intricate, red and buff designs painted with precision, and their jewelry, crafted from shells and turquoise, suggests wide-reaching trade that stretched to the Pacific and the Gulf of Mexico. At the heart of their world was Snatam, a bustling settlement near modern-day Phoenix. There, archaeologists uncovered vast plazas, ritual spaces, and artifacts that hint at a rich spiritual life. And yet, despite their achievements, by the mid-1400s, the Hohokam abandoned their canals and villages. Why? Was it prolonged drought, political unrest, environmental collapse, a quiet cultural transformation into new identities? The canals, now dry, still cut through the desert like faded veins, and in the dust of their forgotten cities, a question lingers. How did a people who tamed the desert simply disappear into it? The Mogollon culture, high in the rugged mountains and pine-covered plateaus of the American Southwest. The Mogollon culture quietly flourished, leaving behind stone dwellings, painted pottery, and a legacy still wrapped in mystery. Emerging around 200 CE in what is now southeastern Arizona, southern New Mexico, and parts of northern Mexico, the Mogollon were among the earliest agricultural societies in the region. They cultivated maize, beans, and squash, while also relying on hunting and foraging to survive in an often unforgiving landscape. Their villages began as pit houses dug into the earth, but over time, they evolved into surface-level adobe and stone structures, many of which still cling to the cliffs they once called home. Their pottery, especially the finely crafted black-on-white bowls, remains among the most distinctive in the ancient Southwest, painted with geometric designs and abstract forms that may have held symbolic meaning. Some pieces even depict human and animal figures, offering glimpses into a world now lost to time. One of the Mogollon's most iconic developments was the cliff dwelling, especially during the later Mimbres phase. These homes, built into canyon walls, offered both shelter and protection. But by 1450 CE, these settlements had been abandoned. No battles were recorded, no collapse is clearly marked, only silence. What caused their decline? Was it drought, migration, or did they merge with other cultures, such as the Zuni or Puebloan peoples? The Mogollon left no written records, only quiet ruins, painted ceramics, and lingering questions. Their story survives not in grand monuments, but in the stillness of mountain canyons, and in the fragile patterns painted by hands that disappeared centuries ago. The Salotho culture in the arid heart of the American Southwest, where rivers twist through cactus-covered valleys, a mysterious culture emerged, one that seemed to defy cultural boundaries. This was the Salotho, flourishing between 1150 and 1450 CE. The Salotho weren't defined by a single place or people. Instead, they appeared as a cultural fusion blending traditions from the Hohokam, Mogollon, and ancestral Puebloan worlds. Their settlements spread across central Arizona, clustered near waterways like the Salt and Gila rivers, and often took root in places already shaped by older cultures. What unified the Salotho wasn't architecture, but belief expressed vividly through their pottery. Salotho, polychrome ceramics, with their bold red, black, and white designs, are unlike anything else from the region. Bowls painted with human figures, birds, and spirals seem to echo stories no longer spoken, symbols possibly tied to ritual, migration, or spiritual protection. The Salotho also built multi-room pueblos, often near water sources, and left behind textiles, tools, and signs of agriculture adapted to the desert's edge. But perhaps what makes the Salotho most intriguing is their role during a time of turmoil. As droughts worsened and violence spread in the 1300s, some archaeologists believe the Salotho way of life offered Guja, belief system or identity that helped unify diverse and displaced peoples. And then, as quickly as they rose, they were gone. By the late 1400s, their pottery ceased, their villages emptied. No battles marked their end, just absence. Who were the Salotho? Really, a people, a movement, a spiritual idea that briefly held the fractured Southwest together. Their symbols remain painted in clay, etched in memory, but the meaning behind them drifts like dust across the desert floor. The Sinagua culture beneath the crimson cliffs of northern Arizona. Remnants of a vanished people lie quietly in stone, silent witnesses to a mystery that has puzzled historians for centuries. They are known as the Sinagua, emerging around 500 CE. The Sinagua were skilled farmers, artisans, and traders who built remarkable stone dwellings on high mesas and inside sheltered cliff alcoves. Their most iconic site, Montezuma Castle, a 5-story cliff dwelling, still clings to the limestone wall as if frozen in time. Yet despite their ingenuity, by the early 1400s, the Sinagua disappeared, leaving behind only pottery shards, petroglyphs, and ruins that whisper of a once thriving civilization. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of vast trade networks, connecting the Sinagua to cultures as far as Mexico and the Pacific coast. Their pottery and obsidian tools suggest a complex society with spiritual beliefs tied deeply to the land. But their sudden exodus remains unexplained. There are no signs of war, no widespread famine, only the stillness of structures abandoned, mid-use, as if the people simply walked away. Some theorize that drought or volcanic activity forced a migration. Others believe social or religious transformations led them to seek new lands. But no definitive answer has surfaced. And so, the stone dwellings remain perched above quiet canyons, waiting as the desert wind echoes through the ancient walls. One can't help but wonder, where did the Sinagua go, and why did they never return? The Casas Grandes culture in the wide, sun-baked valleys of northern Chihuahua, Mexico, lies the ruined city of Pacuim, a place that once pulsed with life, trade, and innovation. This was the heart of the Casas Grandes culture, a civilization whose rise and fall remains one of the great enigmas of the ancient Southwest. Between 1200 and 1450 CE, the Casas Grandes people transformed this remote region into a vibrant cultural hub. Their architecture was advanced multi-story adobe buildings arranged with surprising precision, complete with drainage systems, ball courts, and ceremonial mounds. Intricate turquoise mosaics, copper bells, macaw breeding pens, and scarlet macaw remains suggests far-reaching trade, stretching deep into Mesoamerica. But perhaps the most remarkable feature of Casas Grandes is its blend of cultures. Influences from the ancestral Puebloans, Hohokam, and central Mexican civilizations intertwine here. Pacuim may have been a spiritual center. Its T-shaped doorways, platform mounds, and ceremonial spaces hinting at complex rituals and cosmology. And then, as suddenly as it rose, Pacuim was abandoned. Structures were burned, idols shattered, and the city fell silent. Whether the collapse came from internal conflict, ecological strain, or conquest remains uncertain. No written records exist. Only charred ruins and scattered artifacts remain to tell the tale. Today, as the desert reclaims the walls of Pacoima, the story of Casas Grandes lingers, half buried in sand and silence. Who were these people who bridged cultures so boldly, and why did their great city, once so full of life, vanish so completely? The Patillon culture along the arid stretches of the lower Colorado River and the sun-scorched deserts of the American Southwest. Traces of a little-known culture lie scattered across the landscape. They are the Patillonan, ancient people whose legacy is as elusive as the desert wind. Emerging around 700 CE, the Patillon culture occupied parts of present-day western Arizona, southeastern California, and southern Nevada. Unlike the monumental cliff dwellings of their eastern neighbors, the Patillon left behind a quieter footprint. Modest pit houses, rock alignments, and enigmatic petroglyphs etched into canyon walls. Yet their simplicity hides a deeper story, one of survival, adaptation, and quiet resilience. Living in one of the harshest environments in North America, the Patillon people cultivated crops along riverbanks, using floodplain agriculture, and supplemented their diet with wild plants and desert game. They were skilled at navigating the vast, open terrain, forming trade networks that reached the Pacific coast and beyond. Pottery shards reveal interactions with the Hohokam and ancestral Pueblans, suggesting cultural exchange rather than isolation. And then, sometime after 1500 CE, the Patillon culture faded. Some groups likely merged with the ancestors of modern human-speaking tribes, while others may have migrated or gradually changed under pressure from climate and colonial expansion. Today, the name Patillon is a label archaeologists use. The people themselves never claimed. Their true identity, their beliefs, their stories, remain largely unrecorded. As we walk the dry washes and rocky plateaus they once called home, only one certainty remains. The desert remembers, even when history forgets. The trincheras cultured in the rocky foothills of northern Sonora, Mexico. A vast network of terraces climbs the desert hillsides like ancient scars. These are the remains of the trincheras culture, a civilization defined not by towering pyramids, but by the quiet precision of stone and slope, flourishing between 200 and 1450 CE. The trincheras people built their settlements on steep hillsides, carving out hundreds of terraces and stone walls that gave their culture its name, trincheras, or the most prominent of these is Cerro de Trincheras, a massive site with over 900 terraces winding toward a summit where ceremonial structures once stood. But why they chose these high, defensively and labor-intensive locations remains a mystery. Unlike many Mesoamerican cultures, the trincheras left few monumental temples or lavish tombs. Instead, they appear to have focused on astronomy, agriculture, and community planning. Some hilltop structures align with solar events, suggesting a deep connection to celestial cycles. Below, irrigated fields and grinding stones speak of a people rooted in the rhythms of land and sky. Artifacts reveal trade with cultures from the Hohokam in Arizona to the coastal peoples of the Gulf of California. Shell jewelry, ceramics, and copper bells hint at far-reaching networks and a culture more complex than its modest remains suggest. Then, around 1450 CE, the terraces were abandoned. Whether due to drought, conflict, or cultural absorption remains unclear. Today, the stone lines remain etched into the hills, enduring and silent. As the sun sets over Cerro de Trincheras, its terraces glow faintly under desert light, and one is left to wonder, were these stones mere walls, or part of a we've yet to fully decipher? The Tarascan Empire, high in the volcanic highlands of western Mexico, where obsidian veins cut through dark earth and ancient lakes once shimmered under the sun, rose one of the most formidable civilizations in Mesoamerica, the Tarascan Empire. Its height in the 15th century, the Tarascan state, centered in the city of Sintensanz, meaning place of the hummingbirds, commanded a vast territory across Michoacan and beyond. Known to its people as the Purepecha, this empire stood as the principal rival to the mighty Aztecs. Unlike other Mesoamerican cultures, the Tarascans spoke a unique language with no known relatives and forged an identity that defied domination. The Tarascans were master metalworkers, producing intricate tools and ornaments from copper, silver, and gold, craftsmanship unmatched even by the Aztecs. Their military was equally advanced, wielding bronze weapons in a region still dominated by stone. Fortified cities, roads, and organized tribute systems marked a society built on discipline, innovation, and resilience. When the Aztecs tried to expand westward, they met a wall of resistance. The Tarascans repelled their advances again and again, one of the few to withstand Aztec aggression. Yet, with the arrival of the Spanish in the early 16th century, the empire faced a new, unfamiliar enemy. Though they initially cooperated, the Tarascans eventually fell under colonial rule. Their temples dismantled, their rulers executed. Still, echoes of their legacy remain in the stepped yaquetas of Tizinsanzan, in the delicate metal artifacts buried in the soil, and in the language still spoken by thousands today. But one question lingers: how did this fiercely independent empire rise in isolation? And why did it fall so quietly when it had once stood so strong? The Mixtec civilization in the misty highlands and deep valleys of Oaxaca, a civilization of scribes, artisans, and warrior kings, once thrived, shaping history with stone, gold, and ink. They were the Mixtec, known to themselves as the Usavi, or people of the rain, rising as early as 1500 BCE and reaching their cultural height between 1000 and 1500 CE. The Mixtec civilization was never a single unified empire. Instead, it was a network of powerful city-states like Tilantango, Tututepec, and Meatleach, ruled by noble dynasties with deep ancestral ties. What united them was not conquest alone, but a rich tapestry of tradition, art, and an unbroken record of their past. The Mixtec were master storytellers. Through painted codices on deerskin books that still survive, they chronicled their genealogies, battles, and myths in vivid detail. Their writing system, based on intricate pictographs, remains one of the most advanced in Mesoamerica. These books tell of legendary rulers like Eight-Deer Jaguar Claw, whose exploits blend history with divine fate. They were also unparalleled goldsmiths, creating finely worked ornaments and ritual items that dazzled even the Aztecs, and later, the Spanish. Their tombs, especially in places like Monte Alban and Zacatula, reveal a world of ceremonial grandeur and spiritual complexity. Though many Mixtec cities fell to the Aztecs and later to Spanish colonization, the culture itself endured. Today, the language, traditions, and artistry of the Mixtec people remain alive in southern Mexico. But as scholars continue to decode the ancient codices, a deeper question persists: how much of this rich, rain-born legacy remains hidden, waiting to be rediscovered in the folds of time? The Zapotic civilization in the cloud-kissed valleys of Oaxaca, long before the rise of the Aztecs or Maya, a sophisticated civilization laid the foundations of Mesoamerican culture. They were the Zapotic Bayanazar, the Cloud People. The story begins over 2,500 years ago, with the rise of Monte Alban, a great city carved into the summit of a mountain. From this commanding height, the Zapotecs oversaw a vast urban center filled with plazas, temples, observatories, and carved stone monuments. Monte Alban became one of the earliest and most enduring capitals in ancient Mexico. Active from around 500 BCE to 800 CE, the Zapotic were pioneers in both architecture and intellect. They developed one of the earliest writing systems in intricate set of glyphs etched into stone and an advanced calendar system that mirrored celestial cycles. Their influence radiated through trade, religion, and diplomacy, connecting them to neighboring cultures across the region. Beneath Monte Alban's ceremonial core, tombs held the remains of elite rulers, buried with jade, gold, and painted urns, depicting powerful deities. Yet despite their strength, the Zapotic eventually declined, and Monte Alban was slowly abandoned, perhaps due to shifting alliances or internal change. Even so, the Zapotic did not vanish. Their cities evolved, their traditions adapted, and their descendants still live in Oaxaca today, speaking the same ancient tongue, honoring the same sacred mountains. But as archaeologists continue to unearth temples and decode inscriptions, the mystery endures. What deeper truths lie buried in the clouded heights of Monte Alban, and how much have we only begun to understand? The Toltec Empire in the heart of central Mexico, where winds sweep across highland plains and pyramids rise from the earth like forgotten giants, once stood a city of myth and memory. This was Tula, capital of the Toltec Empire, a civilization that would cast a long shadow across Mesoamerican history. Emerging around 900 CE after the fall of Teotihuacan, the Toltecs forged a powerful state built on warfare, religious authority, and artistry. At its height, Tula was home to tens of thousands and dominated vast territories through conquest and alliance. Its influence spread through trade networks reaching the Gulf Coast, the Maya lowlands, and beyond. The city's centerpiece was its ceremonial core pyramids, ball courts, and imposing Atlantean columns, massive stone warriors carved with feathered headdresses and butterfly breastplates. These figures, still standing atop Temple B, seemed to guard the secrets of a lost world. According to later Aztec chronicles, the Toltecs were idealized as the originators of civilization, masters of knowledge, art, and power. Yet their true history is more complex. Archaeological evidence reveals both grandeur and violence, palaces decorated with serpent motifs, but also signs of sudden collapse. By the 12th century, Tula was in decline. Internal conflict, shifting trade, or prolonged drought may have shattered the empire. Some suggest religious upheaval played a role, especially the legend of Tepiltzin Quetzalcoatl, a priest king who is exiled and prophesied to return, shaping Aztec beliefs centuries later. Today, the ruins of Tula whisper fragments of a legacy, part history, part legend, and as the stone warriors stare silently into the horizon, we are left to wonder, who were the Toltecs, really, and how much of their story still lies hidden beneath the dust of time. The Huastec civilization along the lush tropical coastlines and winding rivers of northeastern Mexico, a distinct civilization, flourished, one often overshadowed by its more famous neighbors, yet rich in artistry, language, and resilience. This was the Huastec civilization, believed to have split from the Maya around 2000 BCE. The Huastecs developed a unique identity far to the north of their southern kin. By the late Classic period 600 to 900 CE, they had established thriving cities across what is now San Luis Potosi, Veracruz, and Tamaulipas. Unlike the towering stone cities of the Maya heartland, Huastec centers were smaller, but filled with cultural vibrancy and spiritual depth. They were known for their distinctive art-elegant stone sculptures of human figures, often depicted with elaborate headdresses and musical instruments. Their pottery was finely crafted, their temples modest but purposeful. Music and dance played central roles in Huastec rituals, and their deities, like the water god Tlazolteotl, reflected a worldview deeply connected to fertility, nature, and the cycles of life. One of the Huastecs' most enduring traits was their linguistic persistence. Despite waves of conquest, first by the Toltecs, then the Aztecs, and eventually the Spanish, the Huastec language, a branch of the Maya family, survived. Even today, it is still spoken by tens of thousands. Yet, much of their early history remains cloaked in obscurity. Their migration, their connections to the greater Maya world, and the full depth of their traditions have yet to be fully uncovered. And so, in the green river valleys of the Huasteca, the echoes of flutes, drums, and ancient voices remain, waiting for the day when their forgotten chapters are finally brought into the light. The Otomi civilization, in the high plateaus and valleys of central Mexico, long before the rise of the Aztecs, lived a people whose roots dig deep into the ancient soil of Mesoamerica. They are the Otomi, one of the oldest and most enduring civilizations of the region, speaking an Otomanguean language that may predate even the great Olmec civilization. The Otomi were once widespread across the Central Highlands. Though often overshadowed by more dominant neighbors, they played a vital role in the cultural and spiritual life of pre-Hispanic Mexico. The Otomi were skilled farmers and builders, constructing hillside terraces and ceremonial centers in regions like Tula, Zilipec, and Mezquitl. Some scholars believe they were among the early inhabitants of Teotihuacan, though their direct connection remains debated. Their religious life was rich with unique deities and rituals, many of which later merged with the spiritual traditions of larger empires. Despite being pushed to the margins by Toltecs and later Aztecs, the Otomi endured. Often labeled as barbarians by more centralized states, they were in fact tenacious survivors, adapting, resisting, and preserving their culture through centuries of upheaval. Even during the Spanish conquest, some Otomi groups allied with the invaders to resist Aztec domination. Today, the Otomi still live in the heart of Mexico, in the hills of Hidalgo, Querétaro, and beyond, keeping their language, textiles, myths, and ceremonies alive. But one enduring mystery lingers. How did this ancient people manage to preserve their identity across millennia, quietly influencing the region's history while remaining just beyond the spotlight of the great empires that rose and fell around them? The Totonac civilization in the lush, emerald hills and coastal plains of Veracruz, Nestled between mountains and sea, flourished a civilization rich in ritual art and architecture, the Totonac civilization. Rising to prominence around 600 CE, the Totonacs are perhaps best known for their magnificent city of El Tahin. This sprawling urban center, filled with ball courts, columned palaces, and finely carved reliefs, was a marvel of Mesoamerican engineering. At its heart stood the Pyramid of the Niches, a six-tiered monument with 365 recessed niches thought to symbolize the solar calendar and the deep connection the Totonac held with time and the cosmos. The Totonac people were skilled in agriculture, cultivating vanilla, maize, and cacao in the fertile lowlands. They were also exceptional artisans, creating intricate pottery, vibrant murals, and delicate jewelry. But perhaps their most famous tradition is one that still survives today, the Danza de los Voladores, or Dance of the Flyers, a ritual in which performers descend from a towering pole, spinning slowly toward the earth in an ancient prayer for fertility and balance. By the time the Spanish arrived in the early 16th century, the Totonacs had come under Aztec domination, forced to pay tribute and labor under foreign rule. When Hernan Cortes landed on their shores, the Totonacs were among the first to ally with him against the Aztec Empire, a decision that would forever alter their fate. And though their cities fell silent in time, their culture never truly disappeared. Even now, in the villages of Veracruz and Puebla, the Totonac language, dances, and rituals persist, quiet testaments to a people whose spirit endures. Still, as we gaze upon the shadowed stones of El Tajin, a question remains: how much of the Totonac world has yet to be unearthed, and how much has already been lost to time? The Teotihuacan civilization in the sprawling valley of Mexico, long before the rise of the Aztecs, an immense city of stone and shadow emerged, so vast, so advanced, that later peoples believed it was built by gods. This was Teotihuacan, the place where the gods were born. At its height between 100 and 600 CE, Teotihuacan was the largest city in the Americas, home to over 100,000 people. Its broad Avenue of the Dead, flanked by the towering Pyramid of the Sun and the Pyramid of the Moon, formed the spine of a meticulously planned metropolis. Temples, plazas, and multi-family apartment compounds filled the landscape, organized with mathematical precision and aligned to celestial bodies. But the civilization behind these monumental achievements remains a mystery. We still don't know the true name of the people who built Teotihuacan. They left behind no written language. We can read only murals, obsidian tools, and the faint echoes of power. Teotihuacan was a city of influence. Its art, architecture, and religious ideas spread far beyond its walls, reaching as far south as the Maya cities and as far north as the deserts of the American Southwest. Trade, ritual, and ideology radiated from its heart. And then, sometime after 550 CE, the city burned. Temples were looted, elite quarters destroyed. But whether the collapse came from internal revolt, climate stress, or invasion is still unknown. The city was abandoned, its name forgotten. Its creators vanished into legend. Even centuries later, when the Aztecs stumbled upon its ruins, they could only guess at its origins. Today, as archaeologists uncover buried chambers and cosmic alignments, one question remains: who built Teotihuacan, and why did they leave behind a city of gods with no voice to speak their story? The Tlatelolco culture, long before pyramids pierced the skies of central Mexico, and centuries before Teotihuacan rose from the valley floor, a quieter, older civilization thrived near the shores of an ancient lake. This was the Tlatelolco culture, one of the earliest and most enigmatic societies in Mesoamerican history, flourishing between 1200 and 400 BCE in what is now the western side of Mexico City. Tlatelolco was not a grand city of stone, but a village rich in artistry, ritual, and mystery. It is best known today for its extraordinary burials, where finely crafted grave goods and figurines offer glimpses into a complex spiritual world. Among the most striking discoveries are the ceramic figurines, graceful female forms with elaborate hairstyles, some with two faces or dual heads. These duality figures have puzzled archaeologists for decades. Were they depictions of mythology, physical conditions, or symbolic expressions of a worldview built on balanced life and death, light and dark, seen and unseen? Tlatelolco people were skilled potters, producing vessels with elegant curves and painted motifs. Their diet, burial practices, and artistic styles suggest contact with the Olmec civilization, hinting at early cultural exchange across Mesoamerica. Yet by 400 BCE, Tlatilco was abandoned. No temples, no fortresses, just the remains of homes and cemeteries, slowly absorbed by the growing powers of later civilizations. Today, the land where Tlatelolco once stood is part of a vast urban sprawl, but beneath modern Mexico City, fragments of this ancient world still surface, quiet reminders of a people who lived, dreamed, and created long before history began to keep proper record. And with every figurine unearthed, we're left to wonder what forgotten truths were once told through clay, now left to speak only in silence. The Olmecazicaluncan, the shifting highland valleys of central Mexico. Nestled between myth and history lies the story of a little understood people known as the Olmecazicalunca. Though often overshadowed by more dominant civilizations, their presence left an enduring mark on some of Mesoamerica's most important sites. Flourishing between 800 and 1200 CE, the Olmecazicalunca are believed to have been a multi-ethnic group, possibly of Gulf Coast or Maya origin, who migrated into central Mexico during a time of upheaval and realignment. Their most significant settlement was Cacaxtla fortified hilltop city in modern-day. Here, high above the valley floor, they built palaces and temples, and covered their walls with stunning murals. These murals are among the most vivid in all of ancient Mesoamerica, depicting warriors, priests, jaguars, sea creatures, and rain gods in bold Maya-influenced style, yet with unique elements that hint at a cultural fusion. The artwork at Cacaxtla suggests deep religious knowledge, elite rule, and a worldview shaped by both warfare and cosmic order. Nearby, the site of Ixotecotl, a ceremonial center with ancient pyramids and fertility symbols, may have served as a spiritual counterpart to Cacaxtla, reinforcing the Olmecazicalunca's presence in the region. But as quickly as they appeared, they faded. By the 12th century, their cities were abandoned. The reasons remain unclear, perhaps conflict with rising powers like the Toltecs, or gradual assimilation into surrounding cultures. Today, their legacy lives quietly in the painted walls of Cacaxtla and the mysterious ruins of Ixotecotl. And, as archaeologists uncover more about this elusive people, one question lingers in the mountain air. Who exactly were the Olmecazicalunca, and what deeper story lies behind their forgotten rise? The Izapa civilization in the lush, volcanic lowlands of southern Chiapas, near the border of modern-day Guatemala, lies the quiet archaeological site of Izapolawans, the heart of a civilization that bridged the ancient and the divine. This was the Izapa civilization, a culture that thrived in the shadowy centuries between the Olmec and the Maya. Flourishing from around 1500 BCE to 100 CE, Izapa was never a great empire, but it was a spiritual and artistic center of profound influence. Its pyramids, plazas, and ball courts were modest in scale, but the site's true legacy lies in its stone monuments. Over 250 carved stelae and altars have been uncovered, many filled with intricate, symbolic scenes of gods, mythical creatures, cosmological cycles, and kings poised between the heavens and the underworld. Izapa is often seen as the birthplace of the Mesoamerican long count calendar, a timekeeping system later perfected by the Maya. Its carvings reflect early concepts of cosmic order, duality, sacred trees, celestial journeys, and may preserve the earliest visual stories of creation myths still found in later Maya texts, like the Popol Vuh, positioned along major trade routes. Izapa linked the Pacific coast to the highland interior. It absorbed influences from the Olmec, and in turn, transmitted its knowledge to rising Maya centers. Yet, by the dawn of the 1st century CE, its influence declined, and the city fell into silence. Today, Izapa lies beneath mango trees and quiet skies, its monuments worn by centuries of rain, but its legacy etched in stone still whispers of a people who watched the stars, measured eternity, and carved the earliest chapters of Mesoamerican time itself. The Ixotecalco civilization, high atop a limestone hill in central Mexico, where the mountains of Morelos catch the sun and the valleys stretch wide below, lies the ruined city of Ixotecalco, name that means place of the house of flowers. But behind its gentle name is a story of power, astronomy, and a civilization forged in a time of collapse. Rising in the centuries after the fall of Teotihuacan, 700 C, Ixotecalco became a major regional center during a period of intense political reshuffling in built with defensive walls, terraced slopes, and fortified gates. The city was carefully planned for both survival and spectacle. Its location offered a commanding view of the region, strategic for trade, warfare, and control. At the heart of Exocalco stood ceremonial platforms, plazas, and the famed Temple of the Feathered Serpent, its stones carved with swirling deities, warriors, and glyphs in a style reminiscent of both Maya and Teotihuacan traditions. These artistic influences suggest Exocalco was a cultural crossroads, a place where ideas converged as much as people. But perhaps its most intriguing feature lies underground, an observatory cave, with a narrow shaft cut into the rock above. During specific times of the year, sunlight beams directly down into the chamber, marking solar zeniths and allowing priests to track the movement of the sun with remarkable precision. By 900 CE, Exocalco's power waned, whether due to internal revolt, economic strain, or the rise of new rivals. The city was abandoned, its stones slowly reclaimed by earth and vine. Today, as wind moves through its empty plazas and the light still strikes the observatory floor, Exocalco stands as a silent witness to a time of transformation, a civilization born from the ruins of another and lost in the turning of history's wheel. The Teotihuacan culture. In the shadowed centuries following the fall of Teotihuacan, central Mexico entered a time of fragmentation, of shifting powers and emerging identities. Among the lesser-known yet culturally significant peoples of this era was the Teotihuacan culture, a transitional society whose presence bridged collapse and rebirth. Flourishing roughly between 600 and 900 CE, the Teotihuacan culture did not build massive cities or towering pyramids. Instead, their influence is seen in the humble traces they left behind: radon brown ceramics, simple domestic structures, and widespread settlements across the Valley of Mexico, Puebla, Tlaxcala, and beyond. Their pottery, with its distinct ring bases and minimal decoration, is the key marker archaeologists use to trace their movements and interactions. What makes Teotihuacan important is not grand monuments, but context. They emerged during a period known as the Epiclassic, a time when the great city of Teotihuacan had crumbled, and no single power filled the vacuum. Yet the Teotihuacan people maintained networks of exchange and local governance, keeping cultural continuity alive, while new centers like Exocalco and Cholula began to rise. Some scholars believe Teotihuacan communities played a role in preserving traditions, agricultural knowledge, domestic practices, even fragments of religious belief that would later be absorbed into new empires. Others suggest they represent migrant or refugee populations adapting to a world in flux. Little is known about their language, religion, or social structure. They left no written records, no carved histories, only the quiet, scattered pottery of a people between worlds. And so, the mystery remains: were the Teotihuacan the remnants of a fallen world, or the quiet architects of the one that would follow? The Chichimeca Confederation. The Chichimeca Confederation, a name whispered with both fear and awe in the chronicles of Mesoamerican and early Spanish history. Not a single empire, but a loose alliance of nomadic and semi-nomadic peoples who inhabited the arid northern frontier of Mesoamerica, what is now modern-day northern and central Mexico. 2. The powerful city-states of the south. Like the Aztecs, the Chichimeca were considered wild, barbaric northern dogs, as some ancient texts harshly labeled them. But this was a misunderstanding rooted in fear. The Chichimeca were fierce warriors, hardened by the harsh landscapes of the Bajío and the Grand Chichimeca deserts. Their culture was built not on monumental architecture or written codices, but on survival, kinship, and unshakable resistance. The term Chichimeca was a broad label applied to various tribes, including the Guachachil, Paim, Zacateco, and Caxcan, among others. Each group had its own language, customs, and leadership, but they shared a way of life: mobile, skilled in archery, and deeply attuned to the land. They lived in small bands, hunted, gathered, and raided, particularly when encroached upon. With the arrival of the Spanish in the 16th century, the Chichimeca Confederation became infamous for its resistance. During the Chichimeca War, 1550 to 1590, they waged a brutal and costly guerrilla campaign against Spanish forces and settlers. Despite lacking iron, horses, or centralized command, they held off Spanish advances for decades, one of the fiercest indigenous resistances in the Americas. Ultimately, their resistance was not broken through conquest, but through peace treaties, bribes, land grants, and forced assimilation. Yet, even as their confederation faded, their legacy endured in the bloodlines of northern Mexico, and in the legend of a people who refused to bow, who were the Chichimeca raiders, guardians, survivors. Perhaps, most of all, they were the spirit of defiance in a land torn between empire and resistance. The Itzamaya, the last torchbearers of a once mighty civilization, guardians of sacred lakes and jungle temples, long after the rest of the Maya world had crumbled into silence, centered around Lake Petinitza in present-day northern Guatemala. The Itza were more than just a surviving branch of the classic Maya. They were warriors, traders, and spiritual leaders who thrived in defiance of time. Their capital city, Najpitan, stood proudly on an island in the lake, a fortress of stone, surrounded by water and dense rainforests. It was a city believed by some to have preserved the echoes of ancient grandeur, even into the late 1600s. While many Maya centers fell by the 10th century, the Itza remained unconquered for over 700 more years. Their isolation granted them a rare kind of independence, a defiant flame in the heart of the lowlands, resisting both Spanish conquest and Maya decline. They maintained religious ceremonies, kept their hieroglyphic traditions alive in oral memory, and even reabsorbed splinter Maya groups, seeking refuge. Spanish missionaries and conquistadors tried repeatedly to bring them under control, but the Itza proved elusive and resilient. They knew the terrain, they understood diplomacy and war. Their last ruler, Kenec, famously stalled Spanish conversion efforts for decades, using both cunning and courtesy. It wasn't until 1697, long after the fall of the Aztecs and the Inca, that Najpitan was finally captured, the last independent Maya city to fall to Spain. With that, the Itza Maya's era of open sovereignty ended. Yet their story is not one of loss. It's a reminder that even in the face of empires, a small people with deep roots can hold the line for centuries, carrying forward memory, tradition, and pride long after the world thinks they've disappeared. The Cacaquel Maya, fierce allies, bitter enemies, and unyielding chroniclers of their own fate, nestled in the highlands of modern-day Guatemala. The Cacaquel were one of the principal Maya groups to rise after the collapse of the great classic Maya cities. By the 15th century, they had built a powerful kingdom centered around Eximche, a stone city surrounded by pine-covered hills and deep ravines, a natural fortress and spiritual capital. Originally allies of the Cache Maya, the Cacaquel broke away and forged their own destiny through trade, warfare, and politics. Their warriors were respected, their scribes were skilled, their rituals blended deep tradition with pragmatic rule. They were known for their complex calendars, religious festivals, and a sophisticated urban system that connected plazas, ball courts, and temples. But what sets the Cacaquel apart is their voice-written memory of conquest and resistance. After the arrival of the Spanish, one of their own nobles began documenting their story. The result, the Annals of the Cacaquels, a rare indigenous chronicle that captures the Maya worldview before, during, and after the Spanish invasion. In it, they describe betrayal, war, and survival not from a European view, but from within. They initially allied with Hernan Cortes and Pedro de Alvarado, helping defeat the Cache, but their reward was subjugation. Soon after, they too rose in revolt, refusing to be pawns in the growing Spanish Empire. Their resistance was met with brutal suppression. Eximche fell, and the Cacaquel were eventually absorbed into the colonial system, but never erased. Today, their descendants still live in the Guatemalan highlands, preserving their language, traditions, and identity. That the Cacaquel Maya remind us that history isn't always written by the victors. Sometimes, it's etched into time by those who refused to be forgotten. The Cache Maya, the Cache Maya, rulers of highland kingdoms, keepers of sacred texts, and architects of one of Mesoamerica's most profound cultural legacies, centered in the Guatemalan highlands. The Cache rose to power after the decline of the classic Maya cities. By the 15th century, they had built a mighty kingdom with their capital Q, Umacay, also known as Utatlan, a sprawling, urban center of temples, palaces, and ball courts, perched atop defensible ridges and ringed by canyons. The KH were not only formidable warriors but also skilled diplomats and traders. Their influence stretched across the Guatemalan highlands, and they often clashed with neighboring groups like the Cacaquel and Tzupagil. Through conquest and alliance, the KH created a regional empire ruled by a powerful king known as the Agepop. But what truly sets the KH apart is their spiritual and literary legacy, often called the Maya Bible, written down in the 16th century by a KH nobleman using the Latin alphabet. This sacred text recounts the creation of the world, the adventures of the hero twins, and the genealogy of the KH rulers. It is a window into their mythic past and a masterpiece of world literature. When the Spanish arrived in the early 1500s, the KH were the dominant force in the region, but that dominance came to an end in 1524 when Pedro de Alvarado, with the help of rival Maya groups, invaded and defeated them. Umarkai was burned, and the KH leadership was decimated. Still, the KH people endured. Today, millions of KH descendants still live in Guatemala. They speak their native tongue, practice ancestral traditions, and remember the stories encoded in the Popol Vuh, testament to a civilization that shaped the soul of Mesoamerica. The KH Maya remind us that power may fall, but stories, especially sacred ones, can outlive empires. The classic Maya civilization. A golden age of science, kingship, and sacred timekeeping, echoing through the jungles of Mesoamerica. From around 250 to 900 CE, the Maya flourished in what is now southern Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and parts of Honduras and El Salvador. This period, known as the Classic Era, was marked by breathtaking advances in architecture, mathematics, astronomy, and writing. It was a civilization deeply in tune with the cosmos and the passage of time. Towering cities like Tikal, Copan, and Calakmul rose from the jungle canopy, connected by roads and trade routes. These urban centers weren't just population hubs, they were cosmic landscapes, carefully aligned with celestial events. Great stone pyramids were built to honor gods, mark eclipses, and serve as tombs for powerful kings. Maya rulers were seen as divine intermediaries between the human world and the gods. Their reigns and rituals were meticulously recorded in hieroglyphic texts carved onto Stelae temple walls. These records tell us of alliances, wars, dynasties, and astronomical predictions with remarkable precision. The Maya had a vigorous calendar system, including the famed long count, which tracked time over thousands of years. Their writing, of the most sophisticated scripts in the ancient world, combined logograms and syllabic symbols to capture both myth and history. But by the late 800s, many southern cities were mysteriously abandoned. The reasons remain debated: drought, warfare, political upheaval, and environmental stress all likely played a role. Yet, while the great cities of the south fell silent, the Maya themselves did not disappear. In the northern lowlands, cities like Uxmal, Chichen Itza, and later Miapan would carry Maya traditions into the post-classic period. And to this day, millions of Maya people live across Mesoamerica, preserving languages, rituals, and a cultural memory that stretches back to the Classic Age. The classic Maya civilization wasn't just a chapter in history, it was a civilization of timekeepers who measured the stars, ruled with divine right, and left behind a legacy carved in stone and written in the skies. The post-classic Maya, an age of transformation, resilience, and reinvention across the ancient Maya world. Spanning from roughly 900 to 1500 CE, the post-classic period followed the mysterious decline of many great classic Maya cities in the southern lowlands. But this wasn't the end of the Maya, it was a new beginning. While once powerful cities like Tikal and Copan fell silent, new centers of power emerged in the northern Yucatan and the highlands of Guatemala. But one of the most influential post-classic cities was Chichen Itza, rising to dominance in the 10th century. Unlike its classic predecessors, Chichen Itza showed clear influences from central Mexico, blending Maya traditions with tall textile architecture and religious imagery. Feathered serpents, human sacrifice, and columned halls hinted at deep cultural exchange or possible conquest. Later, Mayapan would take the mantle as a regional capital, maintaining a confederation of Maya cities until internal conflict and rebellion led to its downfall in the 15th century. In the Guatemalan highlands, powerful kingdoms like the Quech and Cacaquel rose, building walled cities and preserving oral histories that would later be recorded in documents like the Popol Vuh, a sacred Maya text recounting the creation of the world and the deeds of ancestral gods. The post-classic Maya were not only warriors and priests, they were traders, astronomers, and diplomats. Vast trade networks connected them to distant lands, exchanging jade, obsidian, cacao, and feathers. Despite a more militarized and politically fragmented landscape, the Maya continued to observe the stars, record history, and practice complex, religious rituals. Even with the arrival of the Spanish in the early 16th century, the Maya did not vanish. The post-classic period ended with conquest, but Maya culture endured, adapting and resisting across the centuries. The post-classic Maya remind us that civilizations don't simply collapse, they evolve, persist, and survive in new forms, leaving behind legacies that still breathe in the language, art, and traditions of the modern Maya people. The Maya of Copanthi, Maya of Copan, a civilization of precision, artistry, and celestial devotion. Hidden deep in the misty valleys of modern-day Honduras, founded around the 5th century CE, Copan became one of the most refined and intellectually vibrant cities of the classic Maya world. Unlike the vast plains of Tikal or the jungle-guarded pyramids of Calakmul, Copan flourished in a mountainous river valley. Its architecture carved from volcanic tuff, its monuments etched with stories in stone. At the heart of Copan was its dynastic line, beginning with Kayanichiaxcauca Mu, a warrior king likely from the Petan region who established the ruling dynasty around 426 CE. From him sprang 16 kings over 4 centuries, each adding to the city's grandeur, but none were more renowned than Waxaclajan Ubacaewil, known as 18 Rabbit, who commissioned the majestic hieroglyphic stairway, a stone staircase inscribed with over 2,000 glyphs, the longest Maya text ever discovered. Copan was a center of astronomical study where priests and scribes meticulously tracked the heavens. Its temples and ball courts aligned with celestial bodies, reflecting the Maya belief that kings ruled not just the earth, but also mediated the will of the cosmos. Despite its sophistication, Copan was not immune to decline. Around the 9th century, internal strife, ecological pressures, and overpopulation strained its fragile systems. The once bustling plazas slowly emptied, the final inscriptions grew sparse, and eventually, the city fell silent. But the legacy of Copan endures in its intricate sculptures, its detailed glyphs, and the haunting silence of its abandoned temples. It tells the story of a people who mastered the stars, honored their ancestors, and built a kingdom of beauty and brilliance in the heart of the forest. The Maya of Tecalthe, Maya of Tikal, a towering force of stone, strategy, and sacred power deep in the Guatemalan rainforest. Rising from the heart of the Petan Basin, Tikal was more than just a city, it was a symbol of Maya might. Established as early as 400 BCE, Tikal would grow into one of the most powerful city-states of the classic Maya period, dominating regional politics, warfare, and culture for centuries. Its skyline, punctuated by steep limestone pyramids like Temple I and Temple IV, soared above the canopy, echoing the divine ambition of its kings. These massive structures were not only tombs and temples, they were political statements, each step carved in stone asserting Tikal's supremacy over rivals like Calakmul, Karakul, and Dos Pilas. One of Tikal's greatest rulers was Jasar Chan Kayawalai, who reigned in the 8th century and led the city to a dramatic victory over its longtime enemy, Calakmul, in 695 CE. That triumph marked a turning point, ushering in a golden era of construction, trade, and cultural development. Tikal became a hub of astronomy, religion, and writing, where scribes chronicled the deeds of kings and the movements of the stars in intricate hieroglyphs. The city's plazas, ball courts, and stelae tell a story of ritual, conflict, and celestial alignment. Its influence stretched across the lowlands, linked by causeways, alliances, and conquest. But even Tikal was not eternal. By the 9th century, environmental strain, warfare, and societal collapse led to its gradual abandonment. The jungle reclaimed its temples, the king's voices silenced. Yet today, Tikal stands as a haunting monument to Maya brilliance, its pyramids piercing the mist, its legacy etched in stone and shadow. The Maya of Palenquetha, Maya of Palenque, a kingdom carved into the Chiapas highlands, where architecture, art, and cosmic mythology reached breathtaking heights. nestled deep within the lush jungles of modern-day southern Mexico. Flourished during the classic Maya period, from around 250 to 800 CE, though smaller in size compared to sprawling city-states like Tikal. Palenque distinguished itself through unmatched elegance in sculpture, inscriptions, and architectural design. At its heart stood the Temple of the Inscriptions, one of the most iconic structures in all of Mesoamerica. Beneath it lies the tomb of Kyanich Janab Pakal, also known as Pakal the Great, who ruled for nearly 70 years. From 615 to 683 CE, his reign marked Palenque's golden age, a time of cultural renaissance, engineering brilliance, and mythological storytelling carved into stone. The city's structures, including the palace with its unique tower, were adorned with intricate stucco reliefs and hieroglyphs. These texts recorded dynastic histories, astronomical knowledge, and deep mythological lore, revealing how the Palenque Maya viewed time, kingship, and the cosmos as tightly intertwined. Unlike other Maya centers that emphasized militarism, Palenque projected a refined image of spiritual and intellectual power. Its kings were portrayed not just as rulers, but as intermediaries between the human world and the divine, orchestrating cosmic harmony through ritual and calendar cycles. By the late 8th century, however, Palenque began to decline due to warfare, political upheaval, or ecological stress. Eventually, the jungle swallowed its temples, leaving its legacy buried for centuries. Today, the Maya of Palenque are remembered not just for their temples and tombs, but for their profound voice, still echoing in stone, telling tales of gods, kings, and the stars. The Maya of Calakmul, rulers of the Snake Kingdom, locked in a centuries-long shadow war with Tikal. Deep in the heart of the Yucatan jungle, hidden beneath the canopy of modern-day Campeche, Mexico, lies the ruins of one of the most powerful and mysterious Maya city-states of the classic period. From roughly 500 to 900 CE, it stood as the capital of the mighty Con, or Snake Dynasty, whose emblem glypha, snake head, struck fear into rival kingdoms across Mesoamerica. At its peak, Calakmul controlled an alliance of over 50 vassal cities, forming a vast political network that challenged the dominance of Tikal. This brutal rivalry, known as the Tikal-Calakmul War, lasted for more than a century. Battles were fought not just on fields, but in alliances, marriages, betrayals, and espionage, turning the Maya lowlands into a chessboard of kings. Calakmul's rulers, including legendary kings like Yucnum Chin, known as Yucnum the Great, orchestrated major victories, even temporarily subjugating Tikal in 562 CE. Their strategy was not just military, it was diplomatic dominance, binding smaller states into the Snake Kingdom's orbit through both fear and loyalty. The city itself was massive. Over 6,000 structures sprawled across the jungle, including 2 great pyramids, one of which, structure 2, is among the tallest in the Maya world. Yet unlike the better-known ruins of Palenque or Chichén Itzá, Calakmul remained largely hidden until the 20th century. By the late 800s CE, as with many great Maya cities, Calakmul fell into decline. Its alliances frayed, its enemies resurged, and eventually, the jungle reclaimed its stones. Today, Calakmul stands as a haunting symbol of imperial ambition, political complexity, and the rise and fall of a jungle empire that once wore the serpent crown. The Maya of Caracol, a once overlooked city that rose from the shadows to outshine even the mighty Tikal, tucked within the dense Belizean jungle. Caracol was one of the largest and most politically formidable Maya cities of the classic period, thriving between 400 and 900 CE. Its name, meaning snail in Spanish, hides a far more powerful Legacia city that once commanded an empire of allies and subdued enemies. Caracol wasn't always a superpower. In its early years, it was overshadowed by regional giants like Tikal, but everything changed in 562 CE, when Caracol dealt Tikal a crushing defeat, an event known in Maya records as the Star War. This victory marked Caracol's transformation into a major force in the Maya world. Under the rule of kings like Cain II, Caracol entered its golden age. The city expanded massively, covering over 168 square kilometers, housing tens of thousands of people, and featuring sky-piercing pyramids, including the towering Kana, or Sky Palace, still the tallest man-made structure in Belize. Caracol wasn't just a city of war, it was a city of records. Its stelae and altars document royal lineages, alliances, and victories with astonishing clarity. The rulers used propaganda through architecture and inscriptions to solidify their place in Maya politics. The city's decline came gradually after 800 CE, likely due to environmental strain, political fragmentation, and broader regional collapse. By the time the Spanish arrived, Caracol had long been swallowed by the jungle. Today's rediscovery has reshaped our understanding of the Maya lowlands, proving that Caracol was not a footnote in history, but a formidable kingdom that once rewrote the balance of power in the ancient world. The Maya of Yaxtlan, a kingdom carved in stone, standing as a bold testament to the power, artistry, and rituals of classic Maya civilization. Hidden in the dense jungles along the Usumacinta River, near the modern-day Mexico-Guatemala border, Yaxtlan flourished from the 4th to the 9th century CE. Though isolated in terrain, the city was a titan in Maya politics and warfare, best known for its richly detailed limestone reliefs and monumental stelae that narrate centuries of royal lineage, conquest, and blood ritual. Yaxtlan's golden era emerged under the rule of its Amni Balam II, known as Shield Jaguar, who reigned from 681 to 742 CE. He and his successor, Bird Jaguar IV, expanded the city's influence through warfare and strategic marriages. Their victories were immortalized in elaborate carvings found on lintels above doorways, images so vivid they seemed to breathe life into stone. These carvings famously depict royal bloodletting ceremonies, particularly those performed by elite women like Lady Kayab al-Zouk, Shield Jaguar's consort. In one of the most striking reliefs, she pulls a thorn-studded rope through her tongue, sacred act, believed to summon visions from the spirit world. Such scenes weren't just spiritual, they were political theater, reinforcing dynastic power and divine legitimacy. Yaxtlan's rivalry with Pedras Negras and Bonampak shaped much of its military and political strategy, with alliances and betrayals chronicled in glyphs across its temples and palaces. By the end of the 9th century, like many Maya cities, Yaxtlan began to fade, its temples overtaken by vines, its stories buried beneath time. But what remains is extraordinary, a silent city, etched with the echoes of kings, queens, and sacred blood, still whispering its truths through stone. The Maya of Bonampak, a city small in size, but immense in historical revelation. Nestled in the Lacandan jungle of Chiapas, Mexico, Bonampak thrived during the late Classic period, around the 6th to 9th centuries CE. Name, meaning painted wall in the modern Maya language, reflects the city's greatest legacy, a stunning series of murals that offer a rare, colorful window into the rituals, warfare, and royal life of the classic Maya world. Though politically aligned as a satellite of the larger city of Yaxtlan, Bonampak carved its place in history through Structure 1, also known as the Temple of the Murals. Discovered in the 1940s, the murals within shocked archaeologists. Unlike the serene, abstract imagery previously associated with Maya art, Bonampak's frescoes were vivid, dramatic, and emotionally charged. Across 3 chambers, the murals depict a full narrative cycle, a royal heir's celebration, a fierce battle, and the ritual torture of prisoners. These aren't distant myths, they're intense, human moments frozen in lime plaster. The walls erupt with movement, warriors clash, captives bleed, musicians play, dancers leap, and nobles perform sacred rites. Every figure is animated with expressive detail, from their ornate headdresses to the fear in their eyes. What makes Bonampak so crucial is how it challenged earlier assumptions about the Maya. These murals proved that warfare, political violence, and elite spectacle were not only common but central to Maya statecraft and public life. Though Bonampak declined with the rest of the southern Maya lowlands in the 9th century, its painted walls endure. They speak not with glyphs, but with color and motion, testimony to a civilization both elegant and brutal, spiritual and deeply human. The Tolupan people, resilient stewards of Honduras, ancient highlands, high in the misty mountains of central Honduras. The Tolupan, also known historically as the Jacoc, have lived for centuries, perhaps millennia, maintaining a deep connection to their land, language, and traditions. Unlike the sprawling empires of Mesoamerica, the Tolupan were never empire builders. Instead, They were forest dwellers, fiercely independent, and deeply rooted in communal life, with a legacy that has endured colonization, conflict, and neglect. The Tolupan belonged to the larger Hokanshuan language group, and their tongue, Tol, is one of the oldest surviving indigenous languages in Honduras. Their society was traditionally structured around small, autonomous villages scattered across the Oro and Francisco Morazan departments. These communities depended on hunting, gathering, and shifting agriculture, living harmoniously within the rhythms of the forest. What set the Tolupan apart historically was their resistance to Spanish conquest. Their mountainous homeland proved difficult to penetrate, and their decentralized way of life made domination nearly impossible. For centuries, they remained partially isolated and conquered, but not untouched. Missionaries attempted conversion, settlers encroached on their land, but the Tolupan people quietly resisted, preserving much of their cultural identity even as the world changed around them. In modern times, the Tolupan faced numerous challenges: land disputes, environmental exploitation, and marginalization. Yet they continue to fight not with weapons, but with their voices. Leaders have emerged to advocate for indigenous rights, cultural preservation, and ecological protection of their ancestral forests. The story of the Tolupan is not one of golden temples or massive cities. It is the story of survival of a people who, despite being nearly forgotten in the grand narratives of history, remain unbroken. Their presence in Honduras today is a living reminder that resilience, culture, and identity can endure far beyond empire. The Lenca civilization, guardians of Honduras and El Salvador's ancient heartland. Long before the rise of the great Maya cities, the Lenca people had already laid roots across the lush valleys and highlands of present-day Honduras and El Salvador. As one of the oldest known indigenous groups in Central America, the Lenca civilization bridges the distant past to the present, with a legacy deeply woven into the land, language, and folklore of the region. The Lenca were not empire builders in the way the Maya or Aztecs were. Instead, they thrived in small, independent city-states scattered across fertile valleys and forested hills. These communities, though autonomous, shared a common language family, cultural traits, and spiritual beliefs, suggesting a loosely connected confederation of peoples rather than a centralized kingdom. Agriculture lay at the heart of Lenca life. They cultivated maize, beans, squash, and cacao, often on the slopes of the mountains, using terracing techniques. They built stone ceremonial platforms, crafted pottery with intricate geometric designs, and worshipped nature spirits tied to the sun, moon, rain, and earth. Though influenced by the Maya, the Lenca maintained a distinct identity, one rooted more in the rhythms of nature than in monumental architecture. When the Spanish arrived in the early 16th century, they encountered fierce resistance. The most legendary Lenca figure, Lempira, emerged during this time. A warrior and chieftain, Lempira unified many Lenca groups and led a valiant rebellion against the Spanish. Though ultimately betrayed and killed, his name became synonymous with indigenous resistance today. Honduras honors him with its national currency. Despite centuries of colonization, marginalization, and cultural erosion, Lenca identity endures. Tens of thousands still identify as Lenca, working today to revitalize their language, protect sacred lands, and preserve ancestral customs. The story of the Lenca is quiet but powerful, not of towering pyramids, but of persistence, courage, and cultural survival. Their voice still echoes in the mountains they've called home for millennia. The Pipil people, the quiet inheritors of Nahua legacy in the lands of present-day El Salvador, descended from the great Toltec and Nahuatl-speaking peoples of central Mexico. The Pipil migrated southward around the 10th century CE, eventually settling in what is now El Salvador. There, they established a vibrant society that would both reflect and reshape the cultural traditions of their northern ancestors. The Pipil referred to themselves as the Nahuatl, sharing linguistic roots with the Aztecs. But unlike their imperial cousins to the north, the Pipil developed a more decentralized society, organized into independent city-states called Altpatel. Each was ruled by a local chief or king, with alliances often shifting through diplomacy, warfare, and trade. Their most prominent kingdom was Cuscatlan, meaning place of jewels, a wealthy and powerful regional capital. Located in the fertile valleys of western El Salvador, Cuscatlan became a cultural and political center. Renowned for its skilled artisans, stone architecture, and bustling markets, the people cultivated maize, cacao, cotton, and beans, and were especially known for producing rich dyed textiles and obsidian tools. Spiritually, they worshipped a pantheon of gods, similar to the Aztecs, including Tonatiuh, the sun god, and Xipe-Totec, god of fertility and renewal. Yet their traditions were deeply localized, incorporating the sacred landscapes of volcanoes, lakes, and forests into their rituals. When the Spanish arrived in the early 16th century, they were met with fierce resistance. Atlacotl, a legendary Pipil warrior leader, led a defiant stand against the invaders, most famously at the Battle of Acajutla in 1524, where Pipil warriors forced a temporary retreat of the Spanish forces. But despite their bravery, the Pipil, like so many others, eventually fell under colonial rule. Today, the legacy of the Pipil endures in language, place names, and cultural memory. Although the Nahuatl language nearly vanished, modern revitalization efforts are helping restore it. The Pipil story remains one of migration, resilience, and cultural fusion, a lesser-known but vital thread in the grand tapestry of Mesoamerican history. The Corotega Civilization. The forgotten bridge between Mesoamerica and Central America, nestled between the mighty civilizations of the north and the mysterious cultures of the south. The Corotega people thrived in what is now northwestern Costa Rica and parts of Nicaragua, especially around the Nicoya Peninsula. Their story is one of migration, adaptation, and cultural blending, preserving ancient traditions while shaping new ones in unfamiliar lands. Originally Nahuatl-speaking migrants from central Mexico, the Corotega arrived in the region around 800 CE, fleeing the collapse and conflicts of their ancestral homelands. But rather than dissolve into obscurity, they built a new society, one that carried echoes of the Toltecs and early Aztec traditions, yet rooted itself firmly in the landscapes of the south. The Corotega established chiefdoms rather than empires, with each community ruled by a cacique chief and a council of elders. Their settlements were structured with central plazas, ball courts, and temples, reflecting classic Mesoamerican urban planning. Their most important center was Nicoya, a cultural hub known for its sophisticated ceramics, jade ornaments, and ritual life. They farmed maize, beans, squash, and cacao, and maintained active trade routes with other Mesoamerican cultures to the north and indigenous groups to the south. Their artisans produced elaborately painted pottery, often adorned with images of jaguars, birds, and deities, blending their Toltec origins with local motifs. Spiritually, the Corotega worshipped a pantheon of gods, including the maize deity and a feathered serpent figure reminiscent of Quetzal. Rituals included bloodletting, offerings, and ceremonial ball games, reflecting their deep ties to the religious traditions of the Mesoamerican world. When the Spanish arrived in the 16th century, they encountered a people who were not subdued. The Corotega resisted fiercely, using their knowledge of the terrain and tight-knit community networks, but the combination of warfare, disease, and forced labor ultimately dismantled their society. Today, much of their language and identity has faded, but their legacy lives on in the archaeological remains of Nicoya, in the oral traditions of descendants, and in the cultural blending that still shapes modern Costa Rican identity. The Corotega remind us that even those who live at the crossroads of empires can forge a powerful identity of their own quietly, enduringly, and with pride. The Nicaragua people, a fleeting yet fascinating echo of Mesoamerica at the edge of a changing world. By the time Spanish explorers reached the shores of western Nicaragua in the early 1500s, they encountered a culturally complex people known as the Nicaragua. They lived along the Pacific coast, especially near Lake Nicaragua and Lake Managua, and were among the southernmost outposts of the great Mesoamerican cultural sphere. Yet unlike the Maya or Aztec, the Nicaragua story is one of sudden appearance and rapid disappearance, leaving behind more mystery than memory. The Nicaragua were Nahua-speaking migrants, believed to have descended from Toltec or Central Mexican origins. Their migration southward likely occurred around 800 to 1200 CE. During a time of great upheaval and transformation across Mesoamerica, they brought with them the religious beliefs, social structures, and artistic traditions of their northern ancestors, establishing chiefdoms organized around Cachicazgo's small kingdoms, ruled by a cacique. At the heart of their society was a rich cosmology, including the worship of deities like Xolotl, Quetzalcoatl, and Tezcatlipoca. They practiced human sacrifice, built ceremonial centers, and played the sacred ball game. Much like their Mesoamerican cousins to the north, their burial practices often included grave goods, indicating belief in an afterlife and a stratified social order. The Nicaragua were skilled farmers and traders, cultivating maize, beans, cacao, and cotton. They lived in circular houses with thatched roofs and maintained trade networks that stretched into both Mesoamerican and South American spheres, acting as intermediaries between cultures. But when the Spanish arrived, everything changed. The Nicaragua, under the rule of a legendary chief Nicaragua, from whom the modern country of Nicaragua takes its name, initially attempted diplomacy. Yet disease, forced labor, and missionary conversion campaigns soon devastated their population. Within just a few decades, their language faded, their rituals were banned, and their society unraveled under colonial control. Today, little survives of the Nicaragua, beyond archaeological remnants and linguistic traces embedded in place names. Still, their brief presence at the crossroads of Mesoamerican migration and colonial invasion tells a powerful story of resilience, adaptation, and the tragic brevity of a culture caught between two collapsing worlds. The Tairona Confederation, a hidden highland civilization, cloaked in cloud forests and veiled in mystery, nestled within the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta mountains of northern Colombia. The Tairona people built one of the most advanced and enigmatic societies of pre-Columbian South America, flourishing from around 200 CE to the early 1600s. The Tairona Confederation was a network of interlinked communities, not a centralized empire, but a cultural alliance held together by trade, shared beliefs, and mountain terrain. The Tairona lived in steep, forested landscapes, crafting entire cities in the clouds. Their most iconic site, Ciudad Perdida, the Lost City, predates Machu Picchu by centuries. Built around 800 CE, it's a sprawling complex of stone terraces, stairways, and circular plazas carved directly into the jungle. And yet, despite its grandeur, the Tairona left no written records. Their story survives through the stones, and through the descendants who still walk the mountains today. Tairona society was sophisticated and highly organized. Villages were connected by stone-paved roads, and homes were arranged in concentric patterns, each aligned with the rhythms of nature. They practiced agriculture using terracing and irrigation, cultivating crops like maize, cocoa, and avocados in challenging mountain conditions. That their artisans were renowned for intricate goldwork, especially their elegant gold nose ornaments, pendants, and ritual objects now seen as some of the finest metallurgical achievements in pre-Columbian America. These gold pieces weren't just jewelry, they were spiritual tools, connecting shamans to the gods. The Tairona revered nature deeply. They believed in cosmic balance, and their spiritual leaders, known as mamos, acted as caretakers of that harmony. Often undergoing years of isolated training, they viewed the world as a sacred web, where every action rippled outward. When the Spanish arrived in the early 1500s, conflict was inevitable. The Tairona resisted fiercely, not through open war, but through retreat. As missionaries and conquistadors pushed inland, the Tairona vanished into the mountains. Many of their cities were abandoned, reclaimed by jungle. Their descendants, especially the Kogi people, still live today in the same forests, preserving traditions, language, and spiritual knowledge in near seclusion. The Tairona Confederation may have fallen from historical view, but their legacy remains etched in stone, guarded by cloud and forest, and whispered through the rituals of those who remember. The Xenu Civilization, a masterclass in ancient engineering, lost beneath the floodplains of northern Colombia, long before modern drainage systems existed. The Xenu people were building a civilization that tamed rivers, sculpted wetlands, and turned seasonal floods into thriving farmland. Flourishing between 200 BCE and 1600 CE, the Xenu occupied the vast Sinu, San Jorge, and Cauca river valleys, an area frequently submerged during heavy rains. But instead of fleeing the waters, they embraced them. The hallmark of the Xenu civilization was their massive hydraulic engineering system. Across nearly 500,000 hectares, they constructed an intricate web of canals, dikes, and raised fields. This allowed them to manage floods, drain swamps, and grow crops like maize, cotton, and yucca year-round. These earthworks were so extensive that they could be seen from the air, only rediscovered fully in the 20th century. Their cities were lying, yet structured, built around ceremonial plazas, market centers, and elite residences. Unlike the towering stone cities of the Maya or Aztecs, the Zenu used mud brick, wood, and thatch, adapting perfectly to their swampy terrain. The Zenu were also famed for their gold work, much like their neighbors the Torona and Muisca. They created finely crafted nose rings, earrings, pectorals, and votive figures, often worn by the elite and used in religious offerings. Gold wasn't just for decoration, it was seen as a divine substance. Tied to sunlight and cosmic order, society was hierarchical, with a noble class of chiefs and priests overseeing agriculture, rituals, and regional politics. Women held respected roles, particularly in textile production and trade. The Zenu were part of widespread exchange networks, trading goods with distant Andean and Caribbean cultures. When the Spanish arrived in the 1500s, they were drawn to the Zenu for one reason: gold. Towns like Zenofana, today San Sebastian de Yerba, became targets where the Spanish conquered and enslaved many. The Zenu's vast water systems proved difficult to control, and the environment itself became a form of resistance. Today, remnants of Zenu culture persist through the Zenu indigenous communities, especially in the Cordoba and Sucre departments. Their knowledge of weaving and agriculture, passed down through generations, continues to reflect the ingenuity and resilience of their ancestors. The Zenu may not have left towering pyramids, but they left behind something just as remarkable: a civilization that reshaped the land itself, turning flood into farmland, water into wealth, and silence into survival. The Muso people, the fierce guardians of emeralds, feared by conquerors and envied by empires, dot high in the rugged mountains of central Colombia. Nestled in the harsh and humid valleys of the Andes, lived the Muso, one of the most formidable indigenous groups of pre-Columbian South America. Known as the Lords of the Emeralds, the Muso controlled the richest emerald mines in the world, and defended them with relentless determination. Unlike the gold-loving Muisca to their east, the Muso lived in scattered hilltop settlements, surrounded by dense jungle and treacherous terrain. Their society was less centralized and more warrior-based, with fierce clans led by powerful chieftains. Their culture revolved around combat, resistance, and survival, rather than monumental architecture or ceremonial cities. What they lacked in temples and plazas, they made up for in grit. The Muso were expert guerrilla fighters, masters of the land they ruled. They fought nearly every neighbor they had, and when the Spanish conquistadors arrived in the 1530s, they resisted them fiercely. While other civilizations fell quickly to steel and gunpowder, the Muso held out for nearly 2 decades. Their warriors launched surprise attacks, ambushed invaders in the jungle, and made every inch of land costly to take. The Spanish weren't after territory, they were after emeralds. The Muso mines were a source of stones, so pure and brilliant that they captivated Europe and the Middle East. But for the Muso, emeralds weren't just treasure, they were sacred, used in rituals, given as offerings, or worn as symbols of status and protection. These green gems were deeply tied to their identity and spirituality. Despite eventually falling to Spanish conquest around 1559, the Muso legacy lived on, not only through their emeralds, which still dominate the global market, but also through the oral traditions, resistance stories, and cultural resilience of their descendants. Even today, the region around Muso, Colombia, remains the heart of the emerald world. The Muso may not have built empires, but they built a reputation, one of unbreakable resistance, untamed land, and a people whose brilliance shone as fiercely as the stones they guarded. The Pijo civilization, warriors of the Andes, masters of resistance, and a people who defied both empires and invaders with unmatched ferocity. In the heart of modern-day Colombia, where the Magdalena River carves its path through the towering Andes, lived the Pijo, a fierce and proud indigenous civilization known for their defiance, warrior spirit, and relentless independence. Unlike their more centralized neighbors, the Pijo were organized into small autonomous clans, bound by a shared culture and a deep connection to their rugged homeland. The Pijo lived in scattered hilltop settlements, often fortified and hidden among thick forests and mountainous terrain. They cultivated crops like maize, beans, and yucca, and hunted the dense wildlife that thrived in their territory. But above all, They were renowned and feared for their military prowess. To the Spanish, the Pijao were barbaric, but to their allies and descendants, they were freedom fighters, among the last indigenous groups in the Americas to surrender. From the late 1500s into the 1600s, the Pijao engaged in over a century of warfare against Spanish colonization. Their tactics were brutal and effective: ambushes, night raids, and scorched earth retreats into the mountains. Spanish settlers dubbed them indomitable, a name earned through blood and determination. What made the Pijao so feared wasn't just their resistance, but their cultural defiance. They refused conversion to Christianity, they rejected submission, and they protected their ancestral lands with a vengeance that made colonization nearly impossible. Despite centuries of pressure, the Spanish never fully subdued the Pijao. By the time hostilities ceased in the 18th century, many clans had vanished into the forests, others had integrated into surrounding communities, and some had perished, but their legacy endured. Today, the Pijao are remembered not for golden temples or sprawling cities, but for something far rarer: a civilization that stood tall, resisted colonization for generations, and became a symbol of unbroken defiance in the face of empire. The Guayupi people, silent guardians of Colombia's jungles, and keepers of a world now lost beneath the forest canopy. Nestled deep within the tropical lowlands of modern-day Colombia, along the banks of the Meta and Guaviare rivers, lived the Guayupe, resilient and resourceful indigenous people whose lives revolved around the rhythm of the jungle. Far from the monumental stone cities of the Andes or the grandeur of Mesoamerican pyramids, the Guayup built a different kind of civilization, one shaped by the lush, untamed rainforest and the flowing arteries of the Orinoco Basin. The Guayup were skilled horticulturalists, cultivating cassava, maize, and tropical fruits in carefully managed plots known as their settlements, made of wooden homes with thatched roofs, were often ringed by palisades and trenches, a defensive necessity in a region marked by intertribal warfare and growing threats from outsiders. Their social organization was decentralized, based on extended kinship clans, with each community guided by a respected elder or chief. But the Guayup are perhaps most notable for their encounter with the Spanish during the 16th century and their unyielding resistance. When conquistadors like Philip von Hutten and others ventured into Guayupi territory in search of El Dorado, they were met not with gold, but with arrows. The Guayup launched fierce ambushes from the shadows of the jungle, striking swiftly, and then disappearing into the green depths. To many outsiders, the rainforest was a barrier, but to the Guayup, it was a shield. Their worldview was deeply spiritual. The Guayup believed in a universe where nature was sacred, and every river, tree, and animal had its guardian spirit. Ceremonial rituals, music, and body paint played an essential role in community identity and harmony with the land. Today, much of what we know about the Guayup comes from fragmented colonial accounts and archaeological traces, pottery shards, burial mounds, and the memories held by their distant descendants. Though their language and much of their culture have faded, the Guayup remain an echo of a time when the jungle was both home and fortress, and when a people chose to preserve their freedom at any cost.